Millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke, but SHE showed up like a diva, and within minutes, the entire gala stopped in silence. What was meant to humiliate her turned into the most unforgettable night of her life, and the millionaire's biggest regret. Under the crystal blue morning light, Victor Langston strode through the marble-floored lobby of his company's headquarters like a king surveying his castle. Every eye followed him, not out of admiration, but out of fear. His employees knew his temper well. One wrong glance, one poorly chosen word, and their careers could crumble in an instant. Victor thrived on this power. He enjoyed reminding people of their place, especially those he thought were beneath his world of tailored suits, expensive cigars, and private jets. That morning, however, he noticed something, or rather, someone, that sparked his cruel imagination. At the far corner of the lobby, kneeling with a bucket and cloth in hand, was Maya. She was the company's cleaning lady, dressed in her plain uniform, her hair tied back neatly, her face calm and focused as she scrubbed a stain from the floor. She had worked there for years, but few ever spoke to her. She was the kind of person most executives passed by without acknowledgement, as if her presence were part of the furniture. Victor stopped in his tracks, narrowing his eyes. He had seen Maya countless times before, yet on this day, with his annual gala on the horizon, she became the target of his next cruel amusement. The gala wasn't just any party. It was a gathering of power. Politicians, Hollywood celebrities, CEOs of billion-dollar companies, even European aristocrats, all would be there. For Victor, the night was an opportunity to flaunt his wealth and status, to make himself look larger than life. But to keep things interesting, he often sprinkled the evening with stunts or little humiliations aimed at those who couldn't defend themselves. Tonight, he wanted something new. He sauntered toward Maya, his Italian shoes clicking loudly against the polished floor. The sudden sound made her glance up, but she quickly lowered her gaze again, returning to her work. She wasn't one to draw attention. That, of course, only amused Victor more. He loved breaking the quiet once. "Hey, Maya," he said loudly, ensuring everyone in the lobby turned to watch. His voice dripped with false charm, but his smirk revealed the mockery hidden beneath. "Why don't you come to my gala tonight? Black tie only, if you even know what that means." For a moment, silence lingered. Then, as expected, his colleagues burst out laughing. The idea of Maya, a cleaning lady, standing beside them in gowns and tuxedos was absurd. To them, it was a hilarious joke, another cruel display of Victor's twisted sense of humor. Heads shook, whispers passed, and a few even chuckled openly, not bothering to hide their contempt. Victor basked in their laughter like a performer enjoying applause. He tilted his chin slightly, waiting for Maya's embarrassed reaction. In his mind, she would stammer, blush, maybe even beg forgiveness for being noticed. But Maya did none of those things. She paused, wrung the cloth in her hand, and slowly looked up. Her eyes met Victor's with a calmness that unsettled him. There was no fear, no shame, no visible anger either, just quiet strength. She gave a small smile, the kind that was neither forced nor timid, and replied softly yet clearly, "Maybe I will, Mr. Langston." The words hung in the air like a spark. The laughter around them grew louder, echoing across the glass walls of the lobby. Executives clutched their briefcases, shaking their heads in disbelief. They were certain Maya wouldn't dare set foot in that mansion, not in front of the elite of Beverly Hills. To them, her words were just a way to save face, a small attempt at dignity before retreating into invisibility again. But what they didn't notice, what Victor himself failed to see, was that Maya's smile wasn't one of mockery or submission. It was the smile of someone who had nothing to lose, someone who knew her worth, even if the world didn't. Victor gave a dismissive wave, pretending her answer didn't bother him. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. Then, with a chuckle, he turned on his heel and strode away, his entourage following behind. To him, it was over, a moment of entertainment to be forgotten once the real party began. Yet for Maya, that moment lingered. She stood slowly, picked up her bucket, and continued her work with the same quiet grace. But inside, something stirred. She wasn't a fool. She knew Victor had meant it as a joke, as an insult meant to remind her of her place. But instead of breaking her spirit, his words lit a fire. Perhaps it was time, she thought, to remind everyone, including Victor, that dignity and worth were not defined by uniforms, job titles, or the approval of the wealthy. The lobby returned to its routine. Phones buzzed, heels clicked against the floor, and executives rushed past her as though nothing unusual had happened. But Maya's heart carried a different rhythm now. She had made a promise, quietly, to herself and perhaps to something greater, that she would walk into that mansion. Not as a joke, not as a shadow in the background, but as someone who demanded to be seen. And while the others laughed, dismissing her words as a cleaning lady's silly bravado, Maya continued her duties with the same care she always had. Only this time, she cleaned not as someone invisible, but as someone preparing for a night that would change everything. By evening, Victor Langston's mansion was nothing less than a palace. Golden chandeliers rained light over velvet carpets that seemed to stretch endlessly across the marble floors. Soft classical music floated through the grand hall, mingling with the hum of polite laughter and clinking champagne glasses. Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, and limousines lined the driveway, their polished surfaces reflecting the glow of the spotlights, as if competing for attention. Inside, the scent of roses and expensive perfume mixed with the aroma of gourmet dishes being prepared in the kitchen. Victor stood tall at the center of it all, basking in the admiration of his guests. This was his night. Every handshake, every flattering smile, every toast raised in his honor fed his ego like oxygen to fire. He relished it. The way people's eyes followed him, the whispers of admiration, the envy disguised as polite compliments. The gala was moving smoothly, and for a while, Victor completely forgot about the invitation prank he had staged earlier that morning. It wasn't until one of his assistants leaned close and whispered nervously, "Sir, she's here," that the memory came rushing back. Victor frowned. "She?" he asked sharply. The assistant's eyes darted toward the grand entrance, and Victor followed his gaze. And then he froze. The double doors opened slowly, and there she was. Maya. But this was not the Maya the world knew as the quiet cleaning lady in a faded uniform with tired hands. This was someone entirely different. She stepped inside with a grace that silenced the room. Draped across her figure was an emerald green gown, the kind that shimmered under the chandeliers as though stitched with starlight. Her hair, no longer tied back in practicality, fell in elegant curls that framed her face. Her skin glowed under the golden lights, and her eyes carried a confidence so natural that it seemed she had been born to walk among the elite. Every step she took was measured, deliberate, yet effortless. And with each step, the crowd instinctively parted, making way for her as though she were royalty entering her court. The music, though still playing, fell drowned out by the murmurs that spread across the hall. "Who is she?" whispered a Hollywood actress, lowering her champagne glass. "She must be someone important," muttered a senator's wife. "Wait, is that?" Maya gasped, an executive who recognized her from the company lobby. The whispers grew, colliding into a wave of speculation that rippled through the hall. People craned their necks, their curiosity burning brighter than the chandeliers themselves. Victor's heart sank into his chest. His face, however, forced a tight smile. He chuckled loudly, as though amused, as if everything was going according to some hidden plan. But deep inside, a storm brewed. His joke had backfired spectacularly. Instead of being embarrassed, Maya was stealing the very spotlight he had reserved for himself. The guests who had once orbited around him now tilted toward her like moths drawn to a flame. Maya's presence unsettled him more than he cared to admit. She didn't look nervous. She didn't fumble or hide. She didn't even look his way immediately. Instead, she walked confidently among the sea of gowns and tuxedos, smiling warmly at those who greeted her, nodding politely at strangers, as though this world had always been hers. An influential fashion designer stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with recognition of her gown's elegance. Exquisite, he murmured, bowing slightly. Darling, that color, it's perfection. Who styled you? Maya smiled graciously, offering only an old friend with an eye for beauty. Her voice was steady, carrying easily above the murmurs. The designer's expression brightened with admiration, while the crowd around him leaned closer, eager to catch every word. Victor clenched his jaw. He had expected her to be awkward, out of place, perhaps even ridiculed. Instead, she was commanding attention, shaping the atmosphere of his gala, as if she were its hidden queen. He lifted his glass and forced a laugh, trying to regain control. Well, he said loudly, hoping to draw the eyes back to himself. It seems we have a surprise guest. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce. He paused, searching for a way to diminish her. Maya. She works for me, keeping my offices spotless. Gasps fluttered across the room like startled birds. Some guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether to laugh or recoil at the cruelty in his words. Others exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly seeing Maya in a different light. All eyes turned back to her, waiting for her reaction. Would she shrink? Would she falter? But Maya didn't flinch. She turned her head gracefully toward Victor, her smile calm, her eyes unwavering. Yes, I do clean floors, she said softly, her voice carrying a surprising strength. But that doesn't mean I don't belong in this room. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. For the first time that evening, Victor Langston wasn't the man everyone was watching. He had been dethroned, not by another millionaire or celebrity, but by the woman he thought invisible. And as Maya turned her gaze back to the crowd, the whispers returned, but this time they carried something different. Admiration, respect, curiosity. Victor's carefully built stage was no longer his. It now belonged to the very woman he had invited as a joke. The night moved forward, but the spotlight no longer followed Victor. It trailed behind Maya like an invisible crown of light. Everywhere she went, curious eyes lingered. Guests who once cared only about networking or flaunting their jewels now whispered her name, eager to know more. The senator's wife leaned close to her husband and whispered, "She carries herself like she's been in these rooms her whole life." Nearby, a Hollywood producer studied Maya with fascination. Who is she really? Someone important must have discovered her. One by one, people approached her. They introduced themselves as if she were a dignitary or a celebrity too exclusive for headlines. A well-known fashion designer, draped in a silk scarf and pride, pressed forward eagerly. His eyes ran over her gown, admiration spilling from every word. "Darling, that dress is divine. The cut, the color, it's a masterpiece. Who is your designer? I must know." Maya smiled, her lips curved with humility, not arrogance. "It's an old gown," she said, "but it reminds me that beauty doesn't always need a name on a label." The designer laughed in delight, charmed by her words. "Well said. Still, would you consider walking for me in my next show? You'd bring fire to the runway." Gasps rose from those around him. An offer like that was never made lightly. Yet to Maya, it wasn't overwhelming. It was simply another moment she carried with grace. As conversations unfolded, her intellect surprised the guests even more than her elegance. A university dean asked her about art, and she spoke of Renaissance paintings as though she had stood beside the artists themselves. A young tech entrepreneur discussed history with her, and she effortlessly connected the lessons of the past to the problems of the present. Even an elderly diplomat leaned closer, remarking, "Young lady, your mind is sharper than half the people in this room." Every word she spoke broke apart the image Victor had tried to cast over her. She wasn't the cleaning lady. She was Maya, graceful, brilliant, unforgettable. Victor, standing near the center of the hall, felt his chest tighten with every laugh that wasn't directed at him, every sparkle of admiration meant for her. His fingers drummed against his glass, his jaw clenched. He was no longer the brightest star in his own gala, and the humiliation gnawed at him like fire in his veins. Finally, he had enough. He lifted his champagne glass high, tapping it sharply with a fork. The metallic ring cut through the room, silencing conversations, pulling the crowd's eyes reluctantly back toward him. He smiled, but was a cold smile, a predator's grin masking insecurity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, "I see many of you are enchanted by tonight's unexpected guest. Allow me to introduce her properly. This is Maya. She's not a model, not a socialite, not a senator's daughter. No, Maya is my cleaning lady." The words dropped like stones into still water. A few guests chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. Others frowned, sensing the cruelty laced within his voice. The music from the orchestra faltered slightly, then resumed, but softer now, as though even the musicians were uneasy. Victor raised his brows, enjoying what he thought was the reveal of a grand joke. "Yes, that's right," he continued with mocking pride. "She scrubs my floors, polishes my windows, empties my trash. I invited her here as a little experiment, and look how far she's taken it." A heavy hush swept the room. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing they had been charmed by a woman Victor had meant to humiliate. Others stared at him with thinly veiled disgust, suddenly questioning whether his wealth excused his arrogance. But Maya did not crumble. She didn't lower her eyes, didn't stumble, didn't retreat to the shadows. Instead, she stepped forward calmly, her gown flowing like emerald fire under the chandeliers. She looked directly at Victor, her gaze steady and unafraid. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I do clean floors." The crowd held its breath. "But that," she continued, her tone rising with quiet authority, "does not mean I don't belong in this room. Work may stain my hands, but it does not define my worth. Dignity, intelligence, and grace are not reserved for the rich. They belong to anyone who chooses to carry them." Her words struck like thunder, silencing even the most skeptical faces. For the first time that evening, the applause wasn't for Victor's wealth, or for his grand mansion, or for his expensive champagne. It was for Maya. A few clapped slowly at first, then more joined, louder, stronger, until the hall filled with a storm of applause. Some rose to their feet, nodding with respect, their earlier whispers replaced with admiration. Victor stood frozen, his smile faltering as the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had intended to humiliate her, to remind her of her place. Instead, she had claimed a higher ground, one that no amount of money could buy. And as Maya turned gracefully toward the guests, thanking them with a nod, the truth became clear. The gala no longer belonged to Victor Langston. It belonged to the woman he tried to break, but who rose instead as the unshakable heart of the evening. As the night unfolded, Maya continued to charm the crowd effortlessly. Every corner she walked into seemed to light up, not because of her dress or appearance alone, but because of her energy. She laughed genuinely. Her words carried kindness, and people were drawn to her as if she had been born into this world of elegance. Guests who had never paid attention to anyone outside their social circles now found themselves leaning in just to hear what she had to say. She spoke with warmth about books she had read, shared little-known facts about art pieces hanging in the mansion, and even debated politics with a senator in such an intelligent way that he nodded in admiration. To the onlookers, Maya wasn't an outsider anymore. She was the brightest star of the room. Meanwhile, Victor stood on the sidelines, his jaw tight, watching everything spiral out of his control. Every time someone asked about Maya's background, he clenched his glass harder. He had brought her here as a punchline, but somehow she had turned into the main act. His envy grew stronger with each passing minute until he finally snapped. Victor raised his champagne glass, tapping it loudly against a silver spoon. The chatter softened, and the crowd turned to him expectantly. With a sly smile, he gestured toward Maya. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance, "allow me to introduce our mystery guest. You might think she's a model, a celebrity, or perhaps a hidden heiress. But no, this is Maya. She's my cleaning lady. Yes, the very person who mops my floors at the office. I invited her here as, well, let's call it a little social experiment." A ripple of gasps spread across the room. Some people gave forced, awkward chuckles, unsure whether to laugh or not. Others exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with Victor's attempt to humiliate her. All eyes turned to Maya. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy in the hall. But instead of shrinking, Maya lifted her chin and stepped forward gracefully. She looked Victor straight in the eye, her calmness radiating strength. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the room. "I do clean floors. That is my job, and I am not ashamed of it. But my job does not define my worth. I may clean floors, but I also read, I also dream, I also create, and I also belong just as much as anyone in this room." Her words struck like lightning. The room fell into utter silence. No one dare move. Then, slowly, people began to clap. At first it was a few, but soon the applause grew into thunder. Guests stood to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. The very people Victor wanted to impress were now applauding the woman he tried to humiliate. Victor's smug smile dissolved into a pale expression of disbelief. For the first time in his own mansion, at his own party, he was not in control. He wasn't the man everyone admired. Maya was. As the applause faded, the host of the evening, an old family friend of Victor's, stepped forward. With genuine admiration, he looked at Maya and said, "Would you like to say a few words?" Maya hesitated only for a moment before nodding. She walked up to the stage gracefully, the emerald gown flowing behind her like she was born for the spotlight. Taking the microphone, she faced the crowd, her voice calm yet powerful. "I want to thank Mr. Langston for inviting me tonight," she began, glancing toward Victor with a soft smile. "Because of him, I realized something important. Too often, people are judged by what they do for a living, the clothes they wear, or the circles they belong to. But a person's worth isn't defined by their job title. It's defined by who they are inside." The room erupted with applause again, but Maya wasn't finished. She took a deep breath and continued. "What many of you don't know is that I wasn't always a cleaning lady. I studied performing arts in college. Music was my passion, my dream. But life demanded sacrifices, and I gave it up to take care of my family. For years, I've worked quietly, pushing that dream aside. But tonight, standing here in front of all of you, I want to share a piece of who I truly am." Whispers buzzed around the room. Victor looked confused. No one knew what Maya meant until she walked across the stage to the grand piano, standing in the corner. She sat down, placed her fingers gently on the keys, and closed her eyes. Then, with the first note, the entire room fell silent. Her music wasn't just sound, it was emotion woven into melody. The notes rose and fell like waves, carrying sorrow, joy, and hope all at once. It was hauntingly beautiful, the kind of performance that reached into the soul of every person listening. Some guests held their breath, afraid even to move, while others wiped away tears streaming down their faces. By the time the final note lingered in the air, there wasn't a dry eye in the hall. The applause that followed was deafening, the loudest of the night. People cheered, clapped, and even shouted her name. And there, in his own mansion, Victor sat frozen in his chair, humiliated, defeated, and invisible. His cruel prank had backfired in the most spectacular way. The woman he had tried to mock had become the star of the night, while he was reduced to nothing more than a bitter spectator. The gala ended not the way Victor Langston had envisioned, but in a way no one could have predicted. Instead of people crowding around him, as they usually did, the spotlight was firmly fixed on Maya. Guests lined up, eager to shake her hand, to compliment her performance, and to simply be near her presence. A senator told her, "Young lady, you have a gift that can touch the soul." A Hollywood producer whispered, "You belong on a stage, not behind a mop." And the famous designer who had admired her dress earlier leaned in and said, "You have the look, the grace, and the courage. Walk my runway, and the world will know your name." Maya, who had spent years blending into the background, suddenly found herself at the very center of the room, as if all those years of invisibility had been erased in one evening. Her eyes glistened as she spoke to people who once would have never noticed her. "Thank you," she said again and again, her voice trembling with gratitude, yet steady with newfound confidence. She wasn't just being polite. She was overwhelmed by the reality that her hidden dreams were finally being seen. As the night wore on, phones buzzed with notifications. Clips of her piano performance, her powerful speech, and her breathtaking entrance had already gone viral on social media. By midnight, hashtags like hashtag Maya the Diva and hashtag Worth is not job title were trending worldwide. Celebrities posted about her, strangers defended her, and the public fell in love with the woman who had turned humiliation into triumph. Meanwhile, Victor Langston sat alone in a corner, his glass untouched, his smile long gone. The more he tried to make casual conversation, the more people excused themselves and drifted back toward Maya. His empire of arrogance had collapsed in one night, and he could feel the judgment in every side glance and whispered remark. Did you hear? He invited her as a joke. Unbelievable. Cruel. Look at her now. She's the only reason this gala will be remembered. By the time the final guest departed, it was clear Victor's reputation had taken a massive hit. What was meant to be his night of dominance had become the night of his downfall. When Maya finally left the mansion, she didn't walk out quietly like a servant slipping away after work. She walked out as the most celebrated figure of the evening. Paparazzi cameras flashed as she stepped into a sleek town car that one of the guests had insisted she use instead of taking the bus home. Reporters shouted her name, eager to capture the woman who had stolen Beverly Hills' spotlight. That night, lying in bed, Maya stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The weight of the day pressed on her, but for once, it wasn't exhaustion from scrubbing floors. It was the heavy, breathtaking realization that her life was about to change forever. And it did. Within a week, the designer who had praised her called with an official offer: a modeling contract, full sponsorship, and a spot in his upcoming fashion show in Paris. Suddenly, Maya was being fitted for gowns, having her hair styled by professionals, and photographed for magazines that once seemed like distant dreams on a newsstand. She also received scholarship offers from patrons impressed by her story, eager to help her return to her passion for music. Invitations flooded in, from talk shows, from performance venues, even from charities who wanted her to speak about resilience and dignity. And so, Maya made a choice. With her head held high, she walked into her employer's office and handed in her resignation. "I'm grateful for this job," she told her stunned supervisor, "but my path is different now." No longer was she Maya, the cleaning lady. No longer was she invisible. She had become Maya, the diva who embodied strength, grace, and perseverance. Her first runway appearance was nothing short of magical. The lights dimmed, music swelled, and as she stepped onto the catwalk in a dazzling gown, the audience rose to their feet. She didn't just walk. She owned the stage, carrying with her every ounce of dignity that Victor had tried to strip away. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment the world met a star. Back in Beverly Hills, Victor scrolled through his phone, watching the same social media posts everyone else was watching. Each headline stung like salt on a wound. Cleaning lady becomes diva of the year. Victor Langston's cruel joke backfires. From floors to fame, Maya's unstoppable rise. His empire was intact, his millions still in the bank, but his pride was shattered. For all his wealth, he had become the butt of his own joke, while Maya had risen above him with nothing but courage and grace. The final irony? Within weeks, the very designer who had admired her dress signed her, securing Maya's place in the world she had once only glimpsed from afar. The woman Victor thought would always be beneath him now stood taller than he could ever reach. Not because of her fame, but because she had proven something money could never buy: self-worth. And so, the story that began as a cruel prank ended as a tale of triumph. Maya's name was etched into headlines, her story shared as an inspiration around the world. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was Maya, the diva who turned a millionaire's joke into her destiny. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.